Let's move then to Rachel Reeves. Couple of points to look at here. And by the way, if I had been Kemi Badenoch, the first question I'd have asked is, could you tell us when the Energy Secretary is going to resign? Because I think that would have been very consistent. He wasn't there. He wasn't anywhere today, was he? He wasn't at the Ricochet Rach's speech. He wasn't there for that. And he wasn't there at PMQs either.
I think it'll be a while, before he'll let the dust settle on the announcement before he sticks his head up again.
But that would, you'd think, and it would be reasonable that an opposition leader would raise the point that, hang on, this is a man that, clearly central to everything he stands for, Ed Miliband, never used to, but suddenly does in the last couple of years, is net zero and, number one, public enemy number one, aeroplanes, they do the worst, more than cars and everything. We need to have less of it, not more of it. That would have been a classic case to go, well, surely by his own reckoning, he would have to walk the plank.
Well, yeah, if he was consistent. I mean, this goes all the way back to 2009. He was Energy Secretary then as well, under Gordon Brown.
That's very true.
And he threatened to resign over Heathrow, and in the end, the government didn't back it. So this is not, this is a long-standing position he's had. Now, he was asked by an intrepid reporter last week, when this was speculated that the government were going to back it, will you resign? And he was very rude, actually. He said, don't be ridiculous. So there's your answer. He's not going to resign, but it's also going to be deeply uncomfortable for him, because there's all these quotes from the past. Yeah. How can you, on the one hand, support net zero, but also support expansion of airports? But then again, Keir Starmer was against it before the election as well. Now he supports it. So there's
funny what a chauffeur in a red box does for a person, isn't it? I might just stay in this job. And then, of course, they will concoct some kind of, well, don't worry, because it might look like it's environment. We're going to plant some trees in Cleethorpes, and that will offset the footprint.
That's one of the things, I think, is this Nature Restoration Fund. Apparently that's going to help compensate. But also, they're putting a lot of stall in more sustainable aviation fuel. So apparently the fuel is going to get much more sustainable. It's not going to pump out as many greenhouse gases. But I think they're kind of tying themselves in knots a little bit, trying to justify the fact that this is an announcement which really does go against what they've always been saying before.
I think so. I keep getting a lot of messages from people in Cleethorpes, because every time I make that reference, I say they're going to plant lots of trees in Cleethorpes, which is preposterous. There are no trees in Cleethorpes, and there never will be trees in Cleethorpes. Scunthorpe has all the trees, you see. That's the reason. The tax rises as well. She was challenged when asked a question about tax. She said she didn't say anything about, she couldn't rule out tax rises in the future. Very much, again, as a previous caller pointed out to us, she said before there'll be no more tax rises, but the OBR have got to have a little look at the books first. So there might be.
There might be. I mean, I think it would be the absolute last resort, because politically it would just be catastrophic for Rachel Reeves. All the promises they made in the run-up to the election, that they wouldn't have to increase taxes by any more than they were already promising to do, so on VAT on private schools, for instance. But lo and behold, first budget, they whack up taxes by £40 billion, huge increase in employers' national insurance. Then she comes out and says, that's it, it was a once-in-a-parliament job. She tells the CBI, I won't have to do that again for the rest of the Parliament. Everyone's like, oh, that's quite a big announcement. And they've been rolled back ever so slightly since then. So I think she has to keep it in her locker, but knowing that if she ever was to increase taxes again, certainly as soon as this spring, that would be politically just catastrophic.
I would have thought
for her and for the government.
And I just wonder as well about the Heathrow thing, Kevin, whether this is really about mood music. Because there's been a lot of conversation that Labour have got it wrong economically, that the budget is kind of up there with Liz Truss's in the sense of what it's done to the economy and bonds and gilts and all that kind of stuff. And it's it's not a government that is business friendly. It's not a government that understands growth. And this Heathrow thing, as we've been establishing, it could take, a guest told us earlier, to get the planning permission could take 5 years. I mean, what do they do over there? What is that? Is that not just surely the count? So the Heathrow bloke goes online and applies for the planning permission, and the local council go, is it a yay or a nay? And they'll go, yeah. They go, yeah, fine, go on, build it. How long does it take to build a flipping runway?
Well, I mean, there'll be all sorts of legal challenges as well. And
so there's all of that. And Labour know that. So it's not going to happen in this Parliament, and it possibly wouldn't happen in the second one either.
I think you're looking at minimum 10 years before it is actually up and running.
Which is nonsense in itself. Well, if you are pro a third runway.
That's part of the problem. So in practical terms, it's not going to grow the economy certainly this side of, certainly not the 2030s, and possibly not till the middle of the 2030s.
They often say that, you know, when men get talking, specifically men, that all roads, no pun, lead to a Roman reference. You've heard that.
Yeah,
you go back to the road.
yeah.
And of course, you know, I couldn't help it. I didn't realise I did it at the very beginning. But of course, a runway is literally a straight road, as given to us by the Romans. I cannot get now. You may not know this, but I've never built a runway before.
Seriously?
And I've got a funny feeling, don't want to speak on your behalf, Kevin, I don't think you have either. I know you're handy with a bit of tarmac if you have to be.
Yeah, I've never got around to it.
But you've never actually built a runway.
No.
But even we could probably, I think, take an educated guess. I mean, how long does it take to build a big straight road?
Yeah, you imagine the practical terms, there's not a lot of design work.
Let's get this one worked out.
There's not a lot of design work.
Yeah, what's the design? What's the aesthetics of that?
We must have a ruler in here somewhere.
It's like 2 miles long, it's this wide, and it's, you know, made of very deep concrete.
But presumably they have to get authorisation for the land that they use, and obviously there's lots of houses which are going to have to be flattened, so there's compulsory purchase orders and all that type of thing. That's why there's so much opposition in the local area.
So from people who chose to move to in a house near an airport.
It's a bit like HS2, obviously. Lots of people, lots of people made to, and look how that ended up.
That's very true. I'm still flummoxed, and lots of people are referencing China. You know, if China wanted to build a runway, they'd have it done by about June. And they genuinely would, somehow. Let's move then to this story. Labour considering forcing households that only use Netflix to pay the BBC licence. Now, the argument for the BBC licence has been kind of diminishing almost by the hour lately, and it's very hard, even though, you know, once upon a time I had a kind of romantic notion about the BBC, as thinking back of being a kid, Saturday night telly, Generation Game, Starsky and Hutch, all of that, those heady days. But actually, I don't think anybody can intellectually defend it. The only defence is a romantic one.
Yeah, I think people like the BBC and they certainly don't want it to see it go, but the idea that in order to own a television you must have a licence is, you know, it is frankly bizarre in this day and age, not least because lots of people now watch TV online, on laptops, on tablets. They don't actually physically ever turn on a television. So clearly the justification for making you have a licence fee if you don't have a telly does seem absolutely bizarre.
There's two things that will always bamboozle an American. One is telling them about the fact that if you are freelance or self-employed, you pay tax for the year to come before you've even earned it. And they're like, what, so you let the government take your money before you've earned it? I mean, that goes against every convention in American thinking. They can't believe that. And the other one is the licence fee. You know, the idea that you pay a licence for a television. I mean, you know, talk about unfair taxes. That's right up there.
It's quite a quaint notion, really, and as I say, it's one that's it's been and gone as a concept, I think. But there needs to be a replacement way of funding the national state broadcaster. I think making people who don't own a television or don't even watch the BBC or say they don't watch the BBC pay a licence fee if they only ever watch Netflix or Paramount or Disney, whatever. I think that one, I don't ever see that one flying, really. Could they ever come up with, you know, a lot of people often say, and it bothers me because, of course, there's lots of issues around the licence fee. Not only is it hard to defend in today, I mean, it was hard to sometimes defend even before multi-channel TV and digital platforms and the like, but now it's almost impossible. But every now and again, and of course, it's unfair to... you know, it's certainly with news, you know, if you're local newspapers and local journalism struggle as well, because how can they go up again? If you wanted to start a newspaper in your own town, you know, forget it, because you can't go up against the might of the BBC. But then there's a counter-argument that some say that in a world of kind of, you know, where Elon Musk wants you to treat Twitter as your default news platform, which is about the funniest thing anyone could ever say if you're into news. I mean, I know you could search it out if you want to spend a few hours and might find the truth in there somewhere. But could the BBC say, right, OK, it's just going to be news. It's 20 quid a year, and we'll knock down all the current conventions of BBC News, and we will start again, and we will have the greatest global independent news source on the planet. Could they do that? I mean, I guess they could make an argument for that, but I think most people probably associate the BBC now with TV programmes. You know, your Attenborough, big set piece things like that, comedies, or broadcasting huge national events like the Queen's funeral, that type of thing. Which I think people are quite happy to pay for, but not via a compulsory licence, whereby if you don't have one and you're found to be watching the BBC, you could end up in the jail.
Yeah.
In the next like that, I think is difficult to argue for. But then the question becomes, well, how do you fund it? Do you let them have adverts, for instance? You know, why, if you've adverts on other channels, why not the BBC? That could be one.
Channel 4, which is also government owned in that respect.
And that, I think people could deal with that. People don't mind that. So I think it's up for debate. I think clearly the licence fee is going to end at some point, probably sooner rather than later. But it won't mean the end of the channel or the broadcaster. It'll just mean it'll need to be replaced by something which is going to have to be practically effective, but also carry public opinion. And I think that's where the danger is for the government on this one. But this idea certainly is bonkers, isn't it? Well,
and they just don't know who they are, really, And I caught a bit of that Laura Koonsberg thing at the weekend. I've never seen that. Once I stopped watching the Andrew Marr show years ago. I wrote about this in a book because I got very upset about the opening titles, because I didn't like the idea that Andrew Marr was put on a moped, like, do you remember that?
London,
like some kind of Poirot character. They had sort of mysterious music. Here comes quirky Andrew to sort out the... And then I thought, it's not the David Letterman show, for God's sake. And then they do a similar thing with Koonsberg, where they have these sort of openings of her walking through this kind of path to Westminster, or whatever it is, some sort of animated backdrop. It's like, let's stop trying to make, celebrities out of political journalists and stop saying, doing a big debate about, in a moment we're going to talk about the goings-on in Gaza and the terrible death rate. But before we do that, here's Kerry Mulligan. And they do an interview with a Hollywood agent. Stop that. Marr used to have a band, didn't he?
He did. He used to have a band, and that used to...
annoy me.
It used to annoy a lot of people, actually. Because, on the one hand, you'd spend 20 minutes interviewing the Prime Minister or some foreign leader over some really, really important heavy-duty stuff, and then you'd have... can't think of a
it was terrible. It was worse than that, because I remember, I think Gordon Brown was on there once, because what they would do...
you would see them watching it.
You would see them watching it.
Yeah,
so Andrew Marr would go, thank you for watching, and now with their, fresh from their new album, here's Pete's Got Scurvy, or whatever they were called. So the band would start playing, and there'd be Gordon Brown, like, vaguely tapping his foot to this band. It was a horror show.
I had sort of PTSD, I think. I had kind of wiped that from my memory, but I do remember it, and it always was just a little bit odd.
Yeah, and they had Paul McCartney on the Koonsberg thing at the weekend, and, I think she did the introduction by saying, with us is Paul McCartney off the Beatles.
Not the other one.
Or the other one.
Just to make sure you know who he is.
Well, there was a conspiracy about Paul McCartney.
He died, wasn't he?
He died.
Back in the
day. And actually, Paul McCartney that we know today is not the original Paul McCartney.
Which is why they said he had bare feet on the cover of Abbey Road.
Abbey Road, that's right.
For some reason, that signified that it was a body double and the real Paul was dead.
I think I interviewed somebody on that who felt very strongly that
You'll always find people who will believe that.
But it's up there with the moon landing stuff.
Elvis works in the local chippy.
Absolutely.
That type of stuff.
Well, no, that's true, isn't it? Have you never been to Cod's Place in Bromley?
In Scunthorpe, no?
Sorry, that's the one. That's the one. Kevin, thank you. Good to see you. Kevin